Okay, it's 6 o'clock, and for the purposes of this meeting, at least, I'll be the chair. This is a presentation of, public presentation of the parking study that was completed at the end of last year. And I wanted to begin this ad hoc committee with the study so that we can develop agenda items for the future. So take notes and ask questions. John's happy to ask questions and be interrupted if you want. So feel free to interrupt him. Raise your hand if you know how to do it on the Zoom. And we'll start. Thank you, John. You want to introduce yourself since?
Sure. For anybody I haven't met, John Forster with Fishbeck, conducted the parking study. We'll go through a little bit of the process we went through with this, just to get everybody up to speed. Been working on it for what, 8-9 months now, I think. But yes, I'm interested in the conversation, so don't hesitate to ask a question or stop me to clarify or even just interject a thought. And so we can talk about things and go forward from there. So, but thanks for having me. Glad to be here. All right, whenever you're ready, Michael. So just to go through some of the background and what we did here, you know, and realizing when I got here, I was here in July, and spent a full week here. And it's amazing that Hudson has been going through a renaissance for a couple decades, but it continues to go. There's still more development going on. The depot area seems to be a place that's got a lot going on right now. One of the interesting things is you don't have a lot of dedicated off-street parking. You have a lot of curb space and on-street parking, but not a lot of parking lots, and that's due to your maintaining your buildings. So, but there is a strong desire for high levels of quality services, and parking and transportation certainly are public services. The survey that the mayor took back in 2021 showed that almost 99% of all people have a car in Hudson. We have one person here who doesn't. Well, now she does. Oh, she does. She broke down and got one. So, you know, for better or worse, no right, no wrong, Hudson is a driving town. Most people drive to get here. I know a lot of people take the train as well, but people drive to get here, and they drive when they get around. And there's not a ton of viable alternative transportation options. So, you know, and one thing I like to tell people is if you've got parking issues and people complain about parking, that means something's going well. Because when towns are dying, you don't have parking problems. So.
We can join, right? Public meeting? Yeah.
So what we came to do was evaluate the current situation, look at the operations, you know, see what you had going on here, and look at opportunities to make it the parking work better and to make mobility work better. Yeah, as Hudson continues to change, you need a flexible system that allows you to provide those services for the community. So, like I said, I was here for a week. I did parking occupancy counts during the day and then a few at night, just to understand what was going on. We spoke, had interviews. Michael set up dozens. I don't know how many we ended up doing, probably a good dozen with people. I met people on the street, talked to them. We went through some information and other plans. We went through city code. We did a project workshop back in September to go through some of the details and initial observations and talk through possible recommendations. And then we are where we're at now, which is final recommendations and what comes of the end of the parking study. Yeah, just to break the city down into the wards and understand that each part of the city does have slightly different parking needs. And while Warren seems to be the spine, things are different depending on where you're at. So one of the most interesting things, I've done dozens of these studies around the country. I've never seen a city so reliant on on-street parking. That's where your supply is. That's what you have. And that's a good thing in that you haven't torn down a bunch of buildings just to pave over your beautiful city. So that actually is a good thing. But it means you have to think about things differently because you don't have anywhere to put cars really, other than the curb. There's just not a lot of other spaces. There are some parking lots around. Some of them are privately owned and they're well signed. Don't park here unless you're coming to our store. We will tow you away. And that tells you that there is some parking pressure. That's an indicator there's a level of parking pressure. And again, because of the situation with so many of your spots being at the curb and on street, you have to look at your solutions and your future from an on-street perspective, and that's not always the case. A lot of cities are able to look at it from, okay, how can we build more, do more, get more people off the streets? So it is a little different. And some of the issues that come up with that, I know the parklets in the summer are popular. Some people like them, but that being your largest parking supply, is that the best use of that space? And then you have a lot of people who use the city streets for residential parking, overnight parking. And that brings us a whole set of issues and concerns with it as well. And then, you have a lot of people come in to work in Hudson who are driving in. And so where are you storing those cars? So lots of things to consider. The curve has changed a little. COVID, interestingly enough, changed the curve. People want more in and out quickly, more pickups. I spoke with a wine store who said that they did a few deliveries before, but now a good chunk of their business is people stopping at the front. They just want them to bring a box out to them. So that there's more of that. And I'm not sure that's ever going away again. I think people have gotten used to it and they like it. So what might have been normal in 2019 might not be as normal in 2023. So, and it's really hard to cut your on-street supply if you don't have those off-street options. That's really the key. If you put in some short-term spaces, if you put in parklets, and if you do a bunch of things that reduce your supply, you don't have a lot of places to push people. The zoning code was changed for no parking requirements within the city when you have a new development. That is very consistent with trends nationally. We see that a lot. A lot of cities are going to that, although it does imply the city will do something to address the parking needs. And there's tools you've been using, the seeker process. And then rates, hours, fees are all set by the common council. That is something I'm going to talk about because that's a longer process for being able to make changes and you start. I question whether that's common council's role, quite honestly, because they're to set guidance and vision, not dig down into the minor details all the time. So, and then you've got some really great hotel growth that's happened, but the offshoot of that is people are probably bringing a car to get to that hotel. So you're increasing your car use there. Just a little bit on hours and rates. These are your current rates, 50 cents an hour on Warren, 25 cents on such. You do have residential permits for the parking lots. I believe the number for this year or 2022 was 128 of those permits were purchased for the whole city. The Front Street lot, the Amtrak lot is more expensive. And then, vendors or someone doing some work can get a permit for a very reasonable price to be able to park and work while they're in the city. And then your hours of enforcement are 9 to 5 Monday through Saturday. We're going to talk a little bit about that. Those are old bankers hours type of, and that's not really the nature of what Hudson is anymore. So interesting comment that I'll probably, there'll be people who want to talk about hours. So Warren Street, as you all know, it's really your commercial heart of your city. There are over 400 spaces from end to end on Warren Street. So there's a lot of parking spaces on it. There's long blocks, and it's a nice pedestrian thoroughfare, but it is a long walk from one end. You wouldn't ask someone to park down near First Street and walk to 7th Street. So that's a good little light. And then your side streets have lower commercial activity, but they really are used heavily at night. The vehicles are in bumper to bumper at night, parking overnight using that residential space. And then, you know, county parking's in there. I think the county might own the most parking spaces of any individual group in the whole city, pretty close at least. So they have some good sized lots that we need to figure out if we can unlock some of those at crucial times. And then daytime needs, you know, people are coming to visit, short lengths of stay, but they really expect to be able to find a spot that's open in a reasonable. We can discuss what's reasonable. How far is too far to walk? You know, it's probably about 5 minutes. Is a reasonable walk. Once it gets to 10, that people think they're a long way away from where they go. The interesting thing about cities has always been, people think it's too far to walk in the city, but if you go out to the suburbs and you park at Lowe's, you walk that far. It's just that you can see where you're going, even though it's further away than you're willing to park in the city. So it is interesting how that impacts people. But parking is, you know, as we talked about, is key. I think necessary for the commercial success of your businesses downtown. People need to be able to access them and get to them. Yeah, like it or not, people have come to rely on the city streets for their residential parking. And your hotels, at least some of them I know tell their guests to park on the street. And so they are considered public fare to be used. And you know, the alternate side parking rules. Everybody understands why they're there. I don't know anybody who likes them. I haven't spoken with anybody who likes them. But you know, you gotta clean your streets, you gotta clear your snow, you gotta be able to get to the curb once in a while. You can't have it continually park the vehicles for days on end. So there are reasons why that is there. It's not abnormal policy for Hudson. Lots and lots of northern cities have those policies. So and I do have questions about the signs signs at the entrance to the city. I don't think are a real effective way to communicate that policy. That's a tough one. So again, just the conflict between daytime and overnight parkers. One of the real issues with residential parkers is they don't share very well because they kind of want access to the parking 24 hours a day. If you think about where you live, you kind of want to be able to come and go to your place of residence whenever you want. You don't expect there to be someone else in your parking spot when you come back, even if you come back in the middle of the day. So they're just not very good at sharing those spots. And so Hudson has to really set up policies that will help facilitate that as much as possible and really try to get residents, people who live in town, kind of those spots where they can get access to them and use them whenever they want. Just a brief rundown on capacity. You have very long blocks in the city, and you've done a good job of keeping them uninterrupted. So, like I said, Warren Street has 400 space, Union Street has 280, Columbia Street has over 400 spaces. What I found interesting, I did these counts, and there are some individual blocks that are very full, 90 to 100% full, but by and large, you still have a little bit of room to grow. You're not full yet. If development continues, activity continues, I think you will get there where there truly won't be spaces available. When someone says that, it'll be true. You're not quite there yet, but hey, let's hope. We can always hope, right? Things continue to move along. It's going to get, you're going to get more. So. But right now you have a little room, and I think it's advantageous. You have room to make decisions and make plans and be ahead of the game a little bit rather than being behind the 8 ball completely and having to just react.
There's a question online. Margaret?
Oh, sure.
Yes, hi, thanks. I just had a question. I live in the first ward. I participated in your survey. I may be coming up later in your presentation. Did you explore the option? I'm thinking particularly of second ward, not so much a problem in the first ward where I live, But did you, I think third ward also there's an issue. For residents, did you explore the option of permit parking? Where certain blocks would be designated as parking by permit only, so that residents of those blocks would have the option of having a permit. And then you could only park in those spots if you had a permit. Is that something you explored?
We did.
I'm thinking particularly of residents who are, competing. And I personally, I do not have a problem because I have off-street parking, but I live on Union, which is just off of Warren. And I do know that Union Street, obviously people are working on Warren. We don't have meters on Union. So during the daytime, it's, it's fairly fully parked, because people working on Warren need to be able to park without running out to the meter every hour. But I'm just thinking other cities that I've gone to have had designated blocks and so forth where the residents can have a permit, and that block is permit parking. Is that something you looked at, or is that you're going to present that to us as an option?
So we did look at that, and you're right, there are employees working on Warren Street, parking on the side streets, parking on Columbia, parking on Union, parking on State. That is happening. I did look at permit program. I am not recommending it at this time, but it is something that needs to be on the table going forward. The biggest issue is it is a fairly heavy administrative burden, that it's a lot of work to get those rolling. And to keep them up. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't reach a point where it's a good policy and it's a good tool to use. You may reach that point. I think again, with the capacities we saw, I don't think you're quite there yet. So I'm saying right now, I don't think it's a good idea, but it may be in the future.
Thank you.
Sure. So on some of your developments that you've got coming up, they did have individualized parking studies done in those areas. And what you can see is when they studied it, in the depot district, there were almost 200 overnight spaces available when they studied it. But once things are done, there may be, 15, 20, 40 spaces left over there. And even the pocketbook factory is gonna have an off-street lot to do that. So, the studies show that when these projects start rolling through, you are gonna get in a tougher parking situation. And the studies did assume there's a fair amount of walking, that people will somehow get to these locations by Amtrak. I won't say I'm skeptical, I just say I need to be proven that those things are gonna happen. I think you're still gonna get a lot of driving. So that just needs to be measured. You have to keep up with it and keep an eye on that. Your meter's just old, they're tired, they did their job, and it's time for them to move on to greener pastures somewhere. Yeah, I think they've done their job. And again, talking a little bit about street clutter, and it would be nice to get some of those poles off the street if possible. So as I was saying, you can always tell when there's a little parking pressure because the signs start to go up, and when the signs go up, that means that there is some pressure. I didn't see any towing. I didn't talk to anybody who's ever been towed, but I'm sure some people have. And so, the goal is to let's work towards cooperation on these things. Let's not get to where we're always towing people out of places. That's a rough visit to town when your car ends up in the lot outside of town. So I saw a lot of backyard parking through the alleys. It's a great blow-off valve. It keeps them off the street, puts them on their own property. The alleys are virtually every block. There might be, at least in the downtown area, I don't think there's any streets that don't have an alley or alley access. So it's a way to get some parking on people's property and get them off the streets, but also give them a safe place where they are parked. And then, like I said, the county has, a fair amount of lots. There's there's places that are underutilized because they're restricted, because the signs are up. And that is tough to get, deals with people and to push things forward. But the private landowners and private parking can be great help in relieving some of the stress on the parking system. We can get those spots open for them to use. The goal is to not pave any more than you absolutely have to. It's the least attractive treatment of our earth that we can have, even though it is vital and important, so. Signs, signage is very regulatory. It tells you what you can and can't do. There seems to be enough of them. I'm not sure that's completely unclear as to what the rules are. But you know, they're also a little tired and could use a revamping. And, you know, people like an affirmative, not a, hey, you're not allowed to do this, but they'd like an affirmative. It's okay to park here. This is a good spot for you. When I was here in the summer, I was standing in the middle of the street, as I tend to do. And so some guy parked and he got his wife out and kids, and they were both walking away in the store. They got all the way to the other side of the street. And then he panicked, and you could see him panic. He turned around and walked back to me. He goes, "Can I park here?" I was like, "Yeah, you're all right." So he just wanted that affirmative, you know, nod that, hey, it's okay to be here. And then, yeah, like I was talking about, just branding, you know, using that parking P. I found a couple of them around, you know, the big P. I love the old whale and the parking symbol. I think that's great branding. I'd love to see you bring that back. I think it's left over, but I'd love to see you bring that back as part of branding parking in Hudson. Enforcement, the police department does issue the citations. You know, residents, employees, I think get a bulk of the citations, although your visitors do too. If a meter's expired, they get a citation. They do boot and tow. The police don't like to boot and tow for a variety of reasons, but that is not something that they're all anxious to do. It's a last resort type of thing. And you know, I did see people around town kind of making their own rules a little bit. The cones out, parking in yellow. There's things that happen. So enforcement is necessary. If you're gonna have rules, you gotta enforce them to a degree. You don't have to be heavy-handed and slam on people, but if they know the rules are never enforced, they won't follow the policies. That's just human nature, unfortunately. So yeah, so 2/3 of all tickets written are a meter violation, simple meter violation, and almost all the rest are just the wrong side of the street on overnight parking. So those are your two biggies. There's really very little other cited in town, 4% for parking in a no parking zone. So, you know, those are the things you want. And you want people to comply with those. And people largely will if there's options and they understand the rules. Yeah, just to go through the, you know, your fees, you know, and I personally, $10 for an expired meter, probably a little low at this point in time. I'm not sure that is much of a deterrent. So that's enough on that. So just looking at the revenue situation though, parking does, between the meters and the citations and everything else, it does create a bit of a revenue stream. In 2019, prior to the pandemic, it was almost $800,000. The biggest issue is the Front Street lot hasn't really bounced back. Oh, it has now.
Yeah.
Starting to come back.
Oh, it's back big.
Well, good, awesome. And so there's some money there to do some things. The you know, charging for parking really has two things. One, it modifies behavior. It lets people know what they can do. The second thing is it raises money to provide better services. You know, you're paying for it, so it gets better. This is interesting though. I've never seen over half of all revenue come from citations. Usually money is willingly paid far more often than you have to give someone a citation and have them pay that. So, and we answered the bottom question. Front Street has bounced back, which is awesome. So just to talk through that a little bit, best I can tell from the budget, they expect about $480,000 to be returned to the city fund, the city general fund, which is a little bit, 3.8% of the budget. And so to talk about how the city uses that 3.8% and could they live without it if you did something different? It's there. It's a real topic that has to be considered. Looked at your leadership structure and probably the thing that stuck out to me the most is that there's a lot of people who have responsibility for parking in one way or another, and no single group seems to really be in charge. I'm guessing the mayor and the council probably answer more questions about parking than anybody else. And so that's kind of how it goes when everybody's got a piece in it. So the police have their enforcement, Public Works has to have those, the alternate side parking for the cleaning and the snow plowing. The parking bureau does collections and permits. The planning commission oversees applications for new properties and and the common council manages, like I said, some of the details. And so it's really tough to get a cohesive plan together when you've got that many fingers in the pie. It's tough. And again, parking is kind of regulations based instead of customer service based. And so we talk about how do we maybe shift that a little the other way towards more customer service based. Parklets, I think you're just gonna have to measure that and that there's no right or wrong here. Is it of value? Does taking 40 to 80 spots out of commission on Warren Street matter right now? And I think that's something you just got to evaluate every year. Is it worth what you're getting out? I work for cities that have parklets and they charge the lost revenue. You want 3 spaces this summer? Okay, well, average meter makes this much money per year. You owe us this much money for the time those spaces are out of commission. So, like I said, no right or wrong, you just got to evaluate whether it's working for you. And you know what, if 85% of your spaces are on street and you're getting near 90% occupancy, that's a key factor in whether they continue to work for you. Did take a look up at Columbia Health a little bit. They spill over into their neighborhood a little bit. I've certainly seen far worse violators of medical centers spilling into their neighborhood. They're trying to keep people on campus, I think, but you just need to continue to work with them to make sure that they don't spill into the neighborhoods. Their business, their employees, their patients need to be controlled on campus as much as possible, just for safety as much as anything. And that intersection might be the worst intersection I've ever pulled through. So I'm recommending that you hire a traffic engineer to fix that thing. So ADA parking, you do have really a generous number of ADAs, on-street ADA spaces, far more than most inbounds. You're not required by law to have on-street ADA. New York State does not require it, the feds don't require it. So everyone you put out is kind of just goodwill. Now, on that note, many of them don't meet the US Access Board guidelines because they don't have an access ramp near them. So they're there, and if you're gonna keep them, you probably should work towards in the future getting those a little more in compliance with design guidelines. They're not rules, they're just guidelines. Did you pick up the title of ADA coordinators in summer? So we even have the person in the room who would be in charge of that. So, but yeah, kudos to the city for having those though. So, and the people I spoke with, there's definite concern over the redevelopment and Hudson getting busier. A lot of people said, we'd love to have a parking garage. So maybe that is in your future. The depot area has momentum, and I run into this across the country and really I hear it a lot. Cost is not the issue. When I pull up, I want to find a spot. Now there's a point where cost is an issue. If I got to pay $25 to go to dinner, that doesn't feel very good. I don't like that, but 50 cents, $2 to go to dinner, that's fine. But I want a spot open. I don't want to have to circle around the block time and time again looking for those spots. And then Some people just said they felt like policy was applied unevenly. That's got different, that's an opinion that everybody, has. This is just feedback. I wrote down what people told me. So I think I have one more slide of feedback. Yeah, can some of those county services be moved out of downtown? Is that the best place for those services? A lot of people mentioned residential parking is difficult, and people bought houses and they rent apartments without any promise of a parking spot going with those. So that's part of it. Short-term house rentals are caused some of the crowding. That is addressed. You guys have addressed that with code, but your hotels have kind of come. And I heard more than once that Hudson's changing and it's not what it used to be. And you know what? Take that for what it's worth. That's some good and there's probably some bad in there. It all depends on your perspective. So. All right, so that's what I saw. That's what we talked about at our interim workshop back in September. Does anybody have any comments on the current situation while we're at this stopping point? Awesome. We'll keep going. I'll start talking about future needs. Again, elimination of the parking requirements is an open for business sign. You are inviting investment when you do that. It does require the city to have a vision for parking and mobility. And you know what? The city's going to change. And the truth is some people will like it and some people won't, but it's going to change. It'll always change, some for the better, some for the worse, but it's never going to stay exactly the same. Some of your pressing issues, in my opinion, what I saw, your pressing issue is your continued increasing demand. You're not really growing your supply at all, although there's a few smaller lots going in here and there. At some point, if you're above 90% average occupancy across your city, you will start to impact growth opportunities. People will not want to invest if they can't find a place to put their customers. I think your organization, your administrative structure of how you run your parking is again, it's across 5 or 6 departments. I think your rates and your fines are frankly low. I don't think they do their job of modifying behavior. The alternate side policy, I think, is necessary, but could use some tweaking. You need to work on some alternative transportation options and how do we move, we don't move cars, we move people. So how do we move people in a different way so we're not using quite as many cars, especially cars with just one person in them. And then, you have some pretty big stakeholders in town and you have to partner with them, you have to team with them. It can't be an adversarial situation where, anybody wants, I'm going to do what I do and you can't have any impact on that. It can't be that way. And so we just listed some of those people. We got to work together. Yep, the needs of all users, supports your community goals. I don't think anybody wants to change the nature of what Hudson feels like and what it's like to be in Hudson. And so any changes have to kind of consider that there is a personality to the city that you want to keep. It needs to be financially self-sustaining. We're not taking any money out of the general fund to support parking, right? That's probably true. Reasonable complexity, that it can be managed, and that it plans for the future and solves problems. That it doesn't just exist to perpetuate itself, but it actually makes the city a better place to live and helps plan for the future. Again, the responses from the people I talked to, they want there to be a vision for community parking. They want clearly identified goals. You need to commit to funding parking and mobility services. I hate to say it, we all know it, there's nothing free. Some of the hassles are currently being ignored because it's cheap, but that won't last. If, again, the issue is not the cost, it is the access, and can I get to it? And can I find a space? All right. Been through a lot of this, but I was reiterating it. So a need for consolidated operational responsibility. There needs to be some group or a person who looks over daily operations, enforcement, adherence to policy, looks at planning in the future, looks at getting away from parking for other mobility issues, improvements of the system, and then eventually financial success. Because you do want the system to work and to be able to fund. I know parking systems that pay for bike infrastructure, they pay for trolleys, they paid for, one town I worked in, they paid for all the flowers in downtown every summer, you know, so that money can go towards enhancing downtown. It should stay where it is though. If it's paid in downtown, it should stay downtown. And what I'll say about administration and leadership is when it's everyone's responsibility, it's no one's responsibility. If there's 5 departments responsible for it, that probably means no one's paying that close of attention to it. They're doing their job. I didn't find anybody who was derelict in their duties. It's just no one owns it right now. So my recommendation is you create a parking mobility director position that has responsibility over those things. And if Front Street lot bounce back, you're talking about the parking system being almost $1 million enterprise. If you got $1 million enterprise, someone should probably be paying attention to it. I like the idea of branding the parking bureau and making it a one-stop shop for parking and mobility. Right now, if you go in there to complain about ticketing or permit for a back, you know, everybody's got their own little things that they're working on, and you really need a one-stop shop. When we got silly and we played around with a Park Hudson logo with a whale that you might just say that you've got some good branding opportunities, and that's what your visitors are looking for. Again, I said talking before that affirmative, I can park here. My car will be here when I get back, and I'm not going to get a ticket. That's all they're looking for. If you choose not to hire a parking and mobility director and you continue to kind of spread out the responsibility, someone has to hold the system, has to hold all those departments accountable for those things. Or else you're just not going to make any progress. You're going to spin your wheels. And frankly, that's a difficult task. And who has the authority, responsibility, and time to corral all those different departments? That would be a tough question to answer if that's the route you choose to go. But if you don't put anybody in charge of it in 2 years and 5 years, you may have different problems. You're going to have problems. So I think Common Council and the Planning Commission need to be used to set long-term goals, not make decisions like rates and hours, et cetera. There's too many political considerations in that. Sometimes you just need to make the best decision for what needs to be done. I'm a big fan of the Parking Bureau having a standing parking committee of people who are invested in the city and making it better. And that's probably partly staff and partly business owners, partly residents. And you just have some people who you know, give their opinions and talk through ideas and help make it better. And again, you need to foster those relationships with your community stakeholders. Working together, you can accomplish so much more than if people are at odds with each other. So a parking authority, looked into it a little bit in the state of New York. It's its own corporation that's governed by a board. But it has authority. It can buy and sell property. It can accept loan. You know, some of that COVID money that went out went to authorities because it could go from one governmental entity to another. A bureau doesn't give you those type of things. It can bond and borrow money in order to do improvements. And it's set aside. It's set apart. It's not part of the general fund. So my recommendation is, I think you should work towards an authority. I think in the long run, it'll give you the tools you need to manage the parking system. Again, paid parking policy, I think I said this a few times already, but it does 2 things. It modifies driver behavior. It helps you get people where you want them to be, as opposed to scattered all over complaining, and it creates a revenue stream to do other things. And so whether those other things are build a parking garage that you might pour your money into, or enhance mobility options, You know, I got it on another slide further back here, but you know, frankly, your sidewalks need some work. You know, and it might be nice if some of that money were funneled into that, so. Again, more of a compliance-based approach, less tickets, less citations, more people willingly pay. I'll tell you, I think part of the reason some people don't pay, they don't carry change. And so having meters everywhere that only take change and that's their only option, they probably would have paid, they just couldn't. Because, I mean, all right, let's change on them right now. No one.
4 quarters.
4 quarters. So, it's just changing times, that we have. But if you want people to comply with the rules, you have to give them options, and that means a cash option for those, there's still people out there who love their cash, credit card options, but really where we're at is mobile. And at the end of the day, you want over 90% of all your payments coming through mobile or credit card. Predict consistent, but not overwhelming enforcement. I'm a big fan of forgiveness programs. People make mistakes or they don't know the rules. First ticket, you should be able to waive that right off and explain to them what's going on. But on the flip side of that, I like escalating fees for repeat offenders. If you get 10 tickets a year, maybe that 11th ticket should cost a little more. Maybe you should jump into the compliance pool and enjoy it as opposed to just continuing to get tickets.
Well, 3 or more, you get a boot.
I'm talking about even paid. Like, there's some people who rack them up and they just pay them every time, you know, but that's rather than pay the meter because they don't carry quarters, they'll just pay $10, you know, so. Metered parking, I know a lot of the side streets have meters on them. I think you should consider doing more of that. But I also think that on some of those side streets, in certain blocks, you should consider a very limited employee parking plan there where you would allow people to park at meters on some of the side streets if they have an employee permit. But you know, paid parking is what keeps the residents off of Warren Street. It is, and that's where you want people to park. So if you don't want, you know, that's its job. When I say it modifies behavior, that's what it does. I either got to pay or I'm going to get a ticket if I don't park off Warren Street. Another question?
Oh, yeah, Margaret has another question.
Sure.
Yeah, you.
You gotta unmute yourself, Margaret.
Oh, yeah, sorry about that. I really like the idea of employee permits. Because that is something I have heard a lot of people working on Warren and in hospitality and so forth, or in retail. They really struggle to find a place to park. You know, without running, because they cannot run in and out every 2 hours to feed the meter. And I think the idea of having a permit for employees is a really good one. I just want to say that.
Thank you, Margaret.
I do think your rates are too low. Again, it doesn't, you're not accomplishing what I'm recommending. You go up to $1 an hour. I'm saying take away the time limit. And if someone wants to stay 8 hours, well, maybe hours 3, 4, and 5, double in price at $2 an hour. And then if they want to even stay longer, then maybe hours 7 and 8 go up to $3 an hour. Time limits are very difficult to enforce. That's why I say that. The officer has to come and establish that the vehicle's there. They have to mark it. And then they have to come back and establish that it's still there, and they have to mark it again. It's more effective to have escalating fees. Most people don't want to stay more than an hour and a half. This is only for those few people who want to do that. I do think your operating hours need to change. I think Hudson's busy from roughly just before lunch till evening, and those are the hours your meters should be in operation. And I think that might give you an opportunity to free up the curbs in the morning for more deliveries, and working with your local vendors to bring the big trucks in 7:30, 8:30, 9:30 in the morning when there's less cars on the curb. I do think you should consider Sunday paid parking, because Sunday's one of your busiest days of your entire week in the summer. On the flip side, maybe you make a Tuesday or a Wednesday free for all the locals who like who like to shop or come into town and don't necessarily. I know I live near a kind of a visitor community. We don't go on the weekends. We go on Wednesday and Thursday when it's slower and it's nicer to go. So I do think there's an offset there. I don't think you should charge 7 days a week.
Margaret, is your hand raised for another question?
Yeah, no, I had another question. So it's kind of related to the employee parking permit idea. Did you look at whether or not we should look at potentially having 4-hour or 8-hour parking? So that, you know, it's not that expensive to park for the day. It's like, I think it's $4. So that if I'm working on Warren Street and I got an 8-hour shift, I can find a spot and have an 8-hour parking situation. Is that something you looked at?
I'm not sure I specifically addressed those terms, but for employee parking, they do need to have a place that they can. Same as everybody else. I know I can park here. I know I can leave it for 8 hours. I know I'm not gonna get hassled. I know I'm not gonna get a ticket. And if I do park on Warren or somewhere else that has other rules, that's a choice I make to make things more difficult. So yes,
But the situation we have right now, I think, in maybe in some of the parking lots is 4 hours, but for the most part, the maximum time is 2 hours. So you have to go out every 2 hours to feed the meter. So if I'm working on Warren Street, and I've decided to, you know, I found a spot, I have to go out every 2 hours to feed the meter. So is that something we should be looking at, to creating spots where there's up to an 8-hour limit on parking?
the employee permit should allow 8-hour parking. If you
Sorry?
have an employee permit, that the permit would grant you 8 hours of parking.
Right.
If you are in a spot that's allowed for that. We
No,
definitely.
the reason I was asking it was you were saying that permit thing is administratively difficult. So I was wondering if one of the things we should be looking at is some parking availability adjacent to Warren that has an 8-hour limit on it, so that someone could, in fact, you know, if we didn't go the employee permit route, could we have some spots that have an 8-hour limit so that you could put in, you know, enough for an 8-hour limit? If that would be simpler to do.
So a residential, all right, yeah, you're right. A residential permit program is very, very burdensome. I'm talking about less than 100 employee permits that would be allowed to park on some of the sides, some of the numbered streets as part. I'm not in favor of designating a space for that, because then the space tends to act like a reserve space, like, oh, someone else can't be in it. What I want to be able to do is mix the employees in a little bit here, a little bit there, on some of the underutilized numbered streets, so that they can do that. Therefore, their permit that they have, whether it's just their license plate or they actually have a hanging permit, would allow them to park in a metered spot or for 8 hours. It would be okay.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Sure, good question. Thank you. Well, those are just, yeah. Payment policy, you know, just for what it's worth, I think where we're headed, where the industry's headed is mobile payments. And where we're really headed is QR codes for those mobile payments. You know, the kiosks are here. They've been around for 20 plus years. I think they're on their way out. Doesn't mean you won't have a few around town, but I think the goal is to get everybody paying by mobile. And even some of us old people are starting to figure out how to do it. So I just think that's where you're at going forward. I wouldn't make a heavy investment in equipment, hardscape equipment again. I would be careful with that. You can spend $1 million on parking equipment in Hudson. And you really don't, I don't think you need to. Citations, again, I talked about eliminating The time limits, again, I love forgiveness programs, but not for public safety violations or ADA violations, just for meters and maybe the overnight. I think your fines need to go up a little bit. Again, the progressive fee structure, even if you're paying them, the goal is not for you to rack up a bunch of tickets and pay them off. I guess that's okay, but that still requires the officers to get involved, tickets to be issued. You know, it's just much better if there's a set of rules that people kind of comply with. What I will say about issuing citations and issuing permits and kind of holding people accountable for the way they do things is, if you don't have a functioning system that's working well, it's just kind of unfair. So you really have to make sure things, like, you can't right now, I know this because I talked to the chief, talked to some other people. You avoid a lot of tickets because the meter's broken. And that's because you have old equipment and you need to get your meters updated. So that doesn't work. You know, you can't write someone a ticket when the meter doesn't work. Everybody understands that. It's not fair. It's the same thing. I can't write a lot of tickets when the person goes, I don't have anywhere to park. I don't have anywhere to put my car. So it all goes together. Overnight parking. I think there's an opportunity to look at the alternate side policy and free up a few streets here and there, maybe just one more night a week. And try to just open up some of those. There's thousands of on-street spaces and half of them aren't used every night. That doesn't mean do away with the alternate side rule, but I think there's some modifications, even maybe on a street by street or even a few block at a time basis, that would allow you to unlock more parking spaces. I would love a single citywide policy. You just don't have that luxury. You have to have more complexity baked into it. I work with a city that has absolutely no overnight parking anywhere in the city, 365 nights a year. It works for them. It will not work for you. It would, you know, so you just have to think about those things. Sometimes you just got to deal with the situation you have. And you know what? As you grow and as parking pressure increases, you may have to consider options that just wouldn't have been acceptable 5 years ago. That's the reality. You may have to do that. Yeah, again, we talked about that. You know, what are the opportunities to free up some of those alternate side parking opportunities? And that just takes cooperation between all the agencies to get that done. I don't know the answer because I don't know all the specifics of what the rules are, but I know you have covenants with the state and the water cleaning and all sorts of stuff. So it's not an easy process, but I think there's an opportunity there, is what I'm saying. Overnight parking. I just said it needs to be a little more complex, but I also said the rules need to be simple and easy to understand. It probably means a new signage package across your city as you implement these rules. People want to be able to stand at their car, look up at a sign and know I can park here, I can't park here. Like if I'm parked on the street tonight and is it an even night or an odd night? Because tonight it's even, but in the morning it'll be odd. I actually had one resident say, it took me a year to figure that out. So, you know, it just needs to be simple and easy and people need to understand it. I've seen cities say Monday, Wednesday, Friday, you can park on this side. Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, Sunday, you can park on that side, which might be easier than alternate side, odd, even stuff. But a new sign package is probably in your future if you change the rules that way. And again, cooperation is the key. And you know what? QR codes are amazing things. You know, an online map where you could stand somewhere, zing it, and you could look at your phones and your phone could literally tell you, you're okay to park there overnight tonight. Awesome. I feel better about that. So again, don't increase enforcement rates or fees without, you know, really getting things kind of in order first. You got to give people opportunities to comply. Like I said, multiple payment options. The issue of free weeks in December came up. I'm not a big fan. I don't think that encourages anybody to come downtown. Maybe there's a few people it encourages, but by and large, it doesn't encourage people that much. And it just kind of creates a little confusion.
Caused the all out chaos when I got rid of it, in 2020.
That's what I'm gonna say. It's not right. It's not wrong. It's a decision like parklets that, hey, does this fit our city? Is it what we need to do? There's no right or wrong. My opinion is not, it doesn't help that much. But you're right. There are people who swear it makes a difference and that my business will die if we get rid of those.
Literally what I heard.
And so, you know, then it becomes, okay, is this just something we want to do?
Never done it again.
So on off-street parking, I do think you need to work. And then again, this is a detailed thing that if you had a manager, a mobility manager, a parking manager, they could dig into this. How many of those reserved spaces are truly needed? Because when something's reserved, that means no one else can use it. And so when you have limited supply, taking those spaces out of use and no one else is allowed to use it, doesn't quite work. The top picture there is one of the lots on Warren, one of the small lots on Warren. I took that picture on a Saturday afternoon when the whole town was hopping and those two spaces were empty because no one wanted to get towed. Somehow we've got to get those spaces. It's only 2 spots, but let's get them back in the system. And maybe, you know, we hold the reserve spots for when we truly need them, the hours we need them. And if we can move some company or some vehicles further out of downtown that we don't need to keep there, let's see if we can do that. Fleet vehicles, I'm saying, that don't really need to be downtown. There's what, 25 or 30 reserve spots in City Hall lot. Is that correct?
Especially that one on the bottom right.
It's the only perk. It's the only perk.
So, and that sign's been there a long time. That's not a new sign. So I do think you increase your rates a little bit in the lots as well. Again, pay stations and mobile payments, you know, but you, like I said, with QR codes, you get away with one pay station for the whole lot and expect most people to pay with their QR codes by their mobile. But let's see if we can get some of those reserve spots open on nights and weekends for sure. You can get the hinge signs that you just flip up and clip at the top and they don't say anything. You know, someone goes through a Friday at 5 and just closes them all. So, you talked about that. You have some nice connections from your alleys to Warren and then some other places. Continue to improve those. That's something that parking and mobility dollars could be put towards, is making those pass-throughs feel well lit, safe, comfortable, easy to find, and easy to use. You do have some opportunities to add some off-street options. There's some small lots on the fringes. You know, John L. Edwards, I see it's for sale. It's been for sale since I was here this summer. But there's an opportunity. That's a big piece of land that frankly is not that far away from downtown. There's opportunities there. But one thing I am recommending, and this would take someone being in charge and making sure it's done, is occupancy counts on a regular basis so you know where you stand. When do we hit that magic 85, 90+% where we don't really have any more room? And occupancy counts are easy enough to do. You put them right in a GIS system. You can take them right on your phone, punch them in, and the data's all there. It's very smooth. We've helped a dozen cities get on that system and track occupancy for themselves, so they always know where they stand. But it's like anything else. Data is power and information is power. So you can say we have a parking problem. Well, okay, let's pull up the numbers. Here's the numbers. Numbers say we don't really have a problem. So where are we mixing up our ideas? I do think you have an opportunity for some more backyard parking off the alleys. I like it for residential and maybe some commercial. It provides, again, it's a relief valve that provides some. I am not a fan of the front yard parking. I'll tell you why. Is because those long stretches of straight curb that you have, yes, the cars are bumper to bumper in there, but once you throw even a 10-foot curb cut in there for them to pull into their front yard, you reduce the efficiency of that. There's a lot of cars out there bumper to bumper every night, and you wanna, frankly, I think you wanna keep that. I think you should try to keep that intact as much as you can. And you know, if people put in some spots in the back alley and the neighbor wants to pay them 25 or 40 bucks a month so that they can park back there too, so be it. The nice thing about a free market when it comes to parking, if there's charging is, and private citizens sell some of their park, you know what? That's another relief valve, just puts more spaces in the system. Again, back to that question of employee parking. On-site parking is the best if you can get alley access or rental of unused spaces from other people's, permits in the public lots, and then again, a limited number of permits at meters on the numbered streets. And maybe if Front Street's busy again, maybe there's no room in it. At the time, I thought it was maybe a good idea to put some employees down Front Street and run a shuttle if that worked. But you'd have to count that. If it's bounced back and it's full all the time, that might be off the table now. We did look at a couple sites, opportunities for parking structures. This is on the City Hall lot. You can fit a tight little parking structure, 3 levels on there and pick up, a few hundred spaces. So the opportunity is there. It's not exactly cheap. And so you do that, you will be paying for it for 30 years. So you can bond it out and pay for it over time and pay for it with revenue from the parking system. But it does fit. Looks like you could get one in there. I think we did a couple more options too. We showed one with less parking spaces, but street level retail. If people don't like the look, what I will tell you is people think parking garages have to be ugly. There are a lot of ugly ones. It's not required. You can make a nice looking parking garage that fits in with the nature of your city, that is architecturally congruent with what's going on around it. They're ugly because people didn't want them to look nice. They're not ugly because that's just how they end up. They can look very nice. And there's kind of a little bit of a hybrid with just a little bit of commercial space in the corner. And splitting. So you've got enough room to kind of do something. And then I think the next slide, Michael, yeah. So we looked at, because your blocks are so consistent, that's Galvin's property down on Front and First there. That's the only other piece of property, I think, in the entire city where the whole block is potentially up for grabs. Or there's not a significant building in there that you would have to tear down. I don't care for that building. I don't know who built it, but it's not the greatest looking building in town, that's for sure. Back to the residential permit program. So, the question that really came to me when I went up there is what problems would this fix? And it might help up near the health center a little bit. If you do institute a permit program and you do charge people for those annual permits, some people will then take the initiative to put in some of those backyard alley spots. They'll say, oh, if I've got to pay, I might as well just clean up my backyard and put my car back there. And so it, again, modifies behavior. That's what charging does. It modifies behavior. And there'd be a little more extra revenue in the system. It is a lot of work. And if you had, think about it, if you had 1,000, I think each ward has 1,000 residents in it. You could have thousands of permits to keep track of every year. That's just a lot of work, And the reality is residents like them if it guarantees them a spot, if it guarantees them the right to look for a spot, what we call a hunting license as opposed to a parking space, they hate them. If you're gonna put it in place, you have to guarantee them a spot. And so, and I'm not sure you're ready to do that. So just some of the issues that come with a permit program. And I think you got to charge enough to make it worth it, to change behavior. And maybe the rules here have changed a little, although I do think down at the Amtrak lot, down on Front Street, there's no need to buy 2 more kiosks. Those are kind of on their last legs. Maybe you buy 1 more, but you go to all the QR code payments down there, make it easier. And Eliminate the reserve space. I guess I'm just not a fan of reserve spaces. Like I said, when something's reserved, that means no one else can use it. Yeah, I got some questions that I think you're gonna need to answer as a community. Is on-street overnight parking a reasonable solution to commercial and hotel needs? Some would say yes, some would say no. Right now, that's what's going on. So you're gonna have to wrestle with that, over the next few years. When possible, and I know it's not in code, it's been removed, but encourage developers to create off-street parking. 10 spots, maybe they can get their staff in there, maybe they can get a few of their overnight visitors in there, something. Anything that helps a little bit. And then the city to where possible, like I said, there's a few lots around town that are empty. If you put in a 15, 18 space neighborhood permit lot somewhere on an empty piece of ground, that might work. Just, it doesn't solve everything, but it relieves a little pressure. And that's where you're at. A little pressure here, a little pressure there. The more you can release a little bit here and there, the better, the further down the road you're gonna get before you have to maybe commit to that $12 million garage. And again, you just wanna be careful you don't slow your momentum down with parking problems. So, yeah, it's a driving city. The ways to reduce people driving is to make it expensive to drive. So that's high cost of parking, inconvenient parking, but that works in big cities where they want to be there no matter what. And it may be damaging to you in Hudson. You have to have high reliability of alternative transportation options. You really want to reduce cars, you got to give them another way to get around, and you don't have that right now. And that really takes community awareness programs, biking programs, walking programs. You just got to get people to buy in and think about it differently than the way they've lived their whole life. I think to have an aggressive goal of reducing vehicle trips is a tough lift for Hudson. That's not a road I would recommend you go down. Some cities choose that. They just flat out want less cars in their community and they'll do anything they can to get it. I'm not sure that's where you want to go. I don't think that's wise policy for you at this time. It might be in 5 years, it might be in 10 years, but right now I think you would shoot yourself in the foot with a policy of aggressive alternative transportation. Yep, you can't, with so much reliance on-street parking, you can't really modify your streets that much. You need those spots. Again, some of your opportunities: improve sidewalks and infrastructure, downtown shuttle. Is there shuttles are something you get funding for? Parking is not. Generally, you can't find any money from the government for parking, but shuttles and other stuff you can. And is there a reliable option from the Amtrak station? Maybe you get more people on the train if they knew when they showed up at 10 o'clock at night, they wouldn't have to wait for a cab or get a friend to pick them up, that there would be reliable transportation options for them. And then I didn't see it, but I would be careful. I would think about the opportunities to regulate scooter use so that it doesn't become a problem for you, and maybe get out ahead of that one a little bit. There's a lot of good examples out there, but I don't think you want scooters parked all over your sidewalks. And I'm pretty sure you don't want them filling your parking spaces either. And there's a safety issue with them just as well. You just got to decide if that's a type of transportation you want around here. And if it is, then put in parking lots for them so that you can congregate them and make the most out of that space for them. I didn't see a lot of signalized crossings. I think from a pedestrian standpoint, you've got some work you could do to do more curb cuts in, to do more signalized pedestrian crossings, and to improve some of your sidewalks. And again, I'm not dumb. I know that's all money. So, and that's what it takes. But there are opportunities there to make it a more pedestrian friendly city. And I don't think you go crazy. No one's riding a bike today, right? So, we we live in the north, there's issues with biking, but to increase biking assets where and when you can and to increase and to improve that is always good. And that's another thing that there's usually grant money for. Bike racks, improving biking infrastructure. If you dig a little, there's money for that. A lot more than there is for parking. And you know what? Maybe someday, as you keep working at it, I think the authority will help you do these kinds of things. You know, you are, I'm not wrong, right? You're the county seat, correct? And so to be the hub of mobility in the county is probably a nice long-term goal to think about. How do we make sure we get the truck route out of town, but we get the mobility coming out of Hudson? So. And I think that's a 10+ year goal, but I think something that's worth thinking about. And you did a bridge district plan, connectivity plan. Well, the things they showed in that plan, that can go all the way up Orange Street. There's options there. So you have some of the work is already done for you. Just keep moving it on through.
That was the idea.
Yeah. It was good. It was interesting stuff. I enjoyed reading that. The county, I think you just gotta get involved with them. They're not gonna wanna talk much, but you're just gonna have to be consistent, show up at their meetings, if your parking director gets to know them and is on good terms with them, you'll be surprised what kind of cooperation can come from just activity like that. And you know what? Can you get those lots open in the evening? They are. But they're not, again, affirming. You stand there and you look at the sign and says, well, it doesn't tell me I can't park here at night, but it doesn't tell me I can either. So you kind of wonder. Those are great places. The county lots might be great places for staff, for employee parking, especially on the weekends during summer when you're just so busy. Getting some of those employees where they know they're okay in those lots and nothing's going to happen to them. So, but that also means making sure that the connectivity to them via pedestrians is, they feel safe, it's well lit and they're easy to get to. Again, same deal with Columbia Health, just work with them, get to know them, make sure you guys are all on the same page. And so medical centers can be ruthless when cities start to infringe on what they're doing. So the better the relationship, the better the opportunity is to always work together. Get the truck route out of town, do whatever you got to do to keep working on that. It's just downtown's not a good spot for it. And I know there's issues, but you've already spent, I don't know who paid for the truck route study. That thing was 800 pages long. So the work's been done. Now it's just a matter of getting it done. I was asked about pavement markings. My opinion is where it's paid parking and highly visitor parking, you should mark those spots. And where it's residential parking, I think you should not mark those. I think you should let them be. Studies have shown you get more cars in a straight line when there's no lines on the street. So for State and Union and all those, you're getting more cars on them by leaving them unmarked. Not to mention the expense and effort and time of keeping those stripes up to speed and looking good. But where people are parking where your visitors are, it's nice to have them stripe. Oh, I'm supposed to be right here. So. All right, setting goals. Again, this is the part of having a parking committee, having a mobility director, is you set those goals. What are we trying to accomplish with economic development, with our sustainability and green focus goals, long range planning? Again, that willingness to impact the city budget. Can the city live without that $500,000? Maybe not in year one. Maybe it takes 5 years to wean them off that or go from there. So, but I do think you want parking to be part of a benefits district where the money spent on parking stays in the district. Now, Hudson's not that big of a city where you would send it clear out to the suburbs because you don't have that much suburbs to send it to. But ideally, any money spent on parking would go back into making parking mobility better in the city center. It would stay where it's spent. All right. After 80 some slides, we're kind of near the end here. Finally, summary. There's got to be a leader committed to operational excellence and future planning. I think an authority is where you want to be eventually. Revenue should be, as I just said, stay in downtown. You got to involve your business owners, your residents and the public. They can't be dictated to, they've got to be part of the solution. But you know, once you set a strategy in place, you can implement it. It can be done. It just takes focus. And that's probably the biggest thing you lose when you have that spread out responsibility, is no one's thinking about the future. They're just thinking about, what do I need to get done today? Or what do I need to get done in this week? And you really need someone thinking, well, here's where we want to be in 5 years. This is the kind of environment we want to have regarding our parking. Again, sidewalk repairs, more signalized bike racks. The guy from the Wix, the driver, he's kind of a nut. He's unofficial greeter to the whole town. I think he sees himself as, but you know what? He drives around town, drops people off places. He'll pick people up and take them places. Boy, that would be really nice to have. Maybe if just in the summer you had a trolley that could do those kinds of things. And again, improve branding and communication. You were good, Michael. And pick away at increasing supply where you can. Do a lot of those little things we talked about. You know, we picked some sites where I thought you could fit a garage, City Hall lot, 11 Warren, John L. Edwards. It seems like, why would you put a garage 3 blocks away from the center of downtown? You know what? It's open land and it's not that long of a walk. And so there's some opportunities, or maybe a shared garage with the county on county property where they might even help a little bit with the cost of that. And I say encourage a private market. Get some of these people who own some paved ground to share it. And if people have to pay to share it, so be it. But it's there. Why build more when it already exists? And again, the counts and monitoring it consistently to know where you stand. All right. Last few slides, kind of give you a quick start guide here. Here's how you dedicate someone to parking mobility, get your goals in order, get your authority started, implement your operational items, and then coordinate with your stakeholders. That's ongoing all the time. Add supply where possible, implement your mobility options, and kind of hang on and watch Hudson continue to grow. So thank you, everyone. That 84 slides. I'm proud of you for hanging in there that long. I don't like making slides that long, but we had a lot to cover.
No, any hands up? Anyone out there have any questions or comments? I can't see them now, Michael. Thank you. No. Anyone here? No. I guess that's it, John. We're gonna have a committee, an ad hoc committee to try to implement some of these things, and I really want to thank you. I think it was a great study.
Oh, thank you.
And worth every penny. And as I talked to you before the meeting, we can talk about some help with how to change the meter system, among other things. And I think some of the things you identify require, I think the parking authority is going to require, it's going to change the power structure here. It'll probably require a referendum. That doesn't mean we can't do it.
I didn't look into.
Yeah, no, yeah, I didn't expect you to. We didn't expect you to, but I'll check that with our attorney. But something like that, where we reassign. On the other hand, I think everybody's going to be willing to do it because no one likes it. You know what I mean? The mayor doesn't want to be charged, council doesn't want to be charged.
Yeah.
To have it centralized would be a phenomenal thing.
Mayor, you know this, if no one's in charge of parking, the mayor
Yeah.
de facto becomes the parking man.
Well, he
Here's the
does.
calls I get now.
Right, he gets it, and then the police get it, and then the DPW gets it, and none of them really want to be that.
Right, yeah.
So it's definitely time.
There were some 30-some authorities in the state of New York,
Mhm.
from little villages that don't even charge for parking. They haven't, part of me couldn't even figure out why they had an authority up through Albany and a couple of the boroughs have their own authority. So from small to large.
Yeah.
But you're right, it's an somewhat independent organization
You have a question?
that would change the
Matt
power structure.
Grubar. Hello, Matt Grubar, are you there?
Yeah, that's me. I'm kind of piggybacking off of the comment that you just made about, the referendum, but I'm curious as what best practices might be in other municipalities, how this new authority, if you will, kind of shoehorns itself into the approval process for development. Does it just become one other thing on the road to approval between planning and historic? Is it its own thing, or how does that usually work?
In other words, would they impact those other boards?
The process.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
So an authority is governed by a board, and the board sets the tone for what they're to accomplish. Albany, you're very close to one of the most successful parking authorities in the country. Albany does a great job of what they're doing, and their goal is to make mobility and parking better in Albany. So no, if someone comes to the planning commission with a project, the parking authority doesn't necessarily get in the middle of that. But the parking authority is there as a tool to help make things work sometimes. Hey, parking authority,
They can answer the questions.
if these guys come in and they need 50 spots, can you give it to them?
Exactly.
No, we can't. Here, we might be able to do it here, or how would we mitigate it with this? And again, authorities can buy and sell property and do different things. And the way you set them up initially, they have founding documents and governing policy. And so you're right, that is not gonna be an easy process, but I think once you get there, you'll appreciate what they bring you.
And in your experience, are there municipalities as small as ours that have authorities?
Yep. Like I said, you're $1 million enterprise per year. And you might be more at some point, be $1.5 million in 5 years. And so I think you could probably get by with a bureau if that's what you wanted, without all the baggage,
Yeah.
for lack of a better word, that comes with the authority. But if you're a bureau, you're a city department, and you have to deal with the baggage that comes with that. I think you'd be better off as authority in the long run.
Okay. Anyone else? I guess that's it. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Hudson's awesome. I love being here. So,
We like it too.
good place.
Even when I can't get space.
That's how you know it's great.
Yeah, right?